We are back with Shaun and I, the Orgasm Crisis, Part 2, the women's side.
Yes.
And Shaun walked in today, and I was just like, guess what we're talking about today? So thank you, Shaun, for being just like, all right, sweet, let's have this conversation.
Absolutely. It's always a fun conversation.
Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this again was because I have been, since the podcast came out, and the Orgasm Crisis, the first one, just fucking talk to each other. Episode 2 came out. It's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, it's a pretty catchy title. You know, people are like, oh, what are we talking about with orgasms?
Yeah.
And some of the feedback that I've gotten is awesome. Like, really, like, from guys that I've talked to have been, thank you for saying something, or yeah, of course, or something along those lines. But I've mostly talked to women about that episode. And I talked to a friend of mine specifically about the conversations that she then had with her partner. Like, it led to this whole dinner conversation between...
Fantastic.
Yes.
If it just helps one couple have better sex and more orgasms, then I think we're doing our job.
And it was 2 couples, because it was like a dinner, like they had invited these 2 couples that I know.
Fantastic.
And they had dinner, they all had dinner together.
And they tell 2 friends, and they tell
and
2
they
friends.
tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends. And they had this conversation. And I was talking to one of the women in one of these couples, and she was saying how she never thought that she could have these conversations with her partner, which illuminated something that I spoke to on that podcast, which was that women don't talk, like, we don't talk about it. And we've also been conditioned to not.
Right.
This woman in particular, she was saying that when her and her husband first married, that was, they were both very devout Christians. They'd both grown up in a very Christian tradition, and that you just don't talk about that. Like, you don't talk about, what you want in sex. You don't talk about, anything like that. She was sharing with me how that's always been a conversation that she's wanted to have. Like, she was saying, like, this conversation that they had, these 2 couples, she was like, that is a conversation that I have always wanted to have and have never been able to. Now she's divorced from her ex-husband, and they're great. They're amicable. It's like, their divorce is actually a really awesome story. We won't go into that today. I actually invited her to be a guest on the podcast, not to talk about her husband necessarily, but she just has really interesting stories. So we'll see if she comes on.
Yeah, that's great.
Cross fingers. But
well, I think that the issue that you just related is something that so many people face in a world where this kind of religious ideology dictates how we think and act and talk about sex. And I think that it's a difficult conversation to have without addressing that conditioning process, because one of the things that I think I've always been kind of upset with, just growing up, kind of waking up into consciousness and, kind of making sense of this reality, was religion has always dictated and governed sexuality in a way that kind of makes women in particular feel very kind of closed off to their sexuality and like kind of kept at a distance, because like sex beyond the bounds of marriage is considered to be like this ultimate wrong, like this ultimate bad no thing that we just don't even look at and discuss. And then we compound that with abstinence only education, and that the only time that sex is okay for a woman is in the confines of a marriage. But when we get to that point and we are married, we still have zero education. We still have zero like confidence. We have zero idea about how to approach sexuality. And so even if you find yourself in that circumstance where you've lived through this life of conditioning, you got to that kind of promised land of marriage, and now the world of sexuality is now opened up to you, you still have no idea what to do, what to ask for, how to talk about it. And it just creates this incredibly unfortunate circumstance that I think so many people, women in particular, are living through.
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that, where I didn't necessarily grow up in a religious household, but just coming from the Midwest, and, you know, majority of my family is religious. And I also don't want to say that it just has to do with religion, although I think that that is a factor for
Correct.
people. But I think that it is, you know, the environment that you grow up in, your religion, your culture, society. I mean, we just talk about U.S. politics. We could just talk about U.S. policy. We don't even have to bring in people's religion. We could just talk about the culture and society and what we talk about. We could talk about sex education. We talk about like the sex education that I got in, you know, Overland Park, where was I in elementary school? Lenexa, Kansas.
No, I think
Lenexa,
it is. Yeah,
Kansas, it's just like the sex education that I got is like, this is a vagina, this is a penis. Sometimes when they go together, babies are made. Any questions? Like, that's kind of
yeah, exactly. And you're like, yeah, about a million. I got a million questions.
A gazillion questions. But even then, like, you have the girls and boys separated, and, you know, girls are asking questions in their way, boys are asking questions in their way, but then it's like, well, don't share with each other.
Right. And everybody giggles in between because we're all like, you know,
so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's just like so uncomfortable, and
Right.
just, which is fine. It's fine that it's uncomfortable. And I think that it's just the way in which we grow up, in which we're conditioned. Normally, people grow up in some people grow up in households where it's just like, yep, it's great, it's awesome, like, you know, talk about sex, and that's fantastic. But that's not the majority of us. The majority of us grow up in households where it's not talked about,
right.
where
it's a really uncomfortable conversation.
It's a really uncomfortable conversation.
And we learn that. We
Yeah.
pick it up like a sponge, because I remember, like, as you were saying, sex education, it's like if the adults in your life are uncomfortable talking about sex, if the teachers and the authority that's kind of bringing you sex education is also uncomfortable talking about sex, then you're probably going to be uncomfortable talking about sex. Like,
Right.
You just learn that. It's not that it has to be that way forever, but it's just, we learn from the modeling that we grow up with. And so that, I think, is I think that's an important thing to address, because one of the things in that conversation is how do we create more comfortable environments in order to talk about sex, because it's one that is so complex and so kind of fearful in a lot of people's minds. Is like, how do we address and talk to kids about sex without it being wrong, without it taking that other turn to someplace incredibly dark and kind of traumatizing? Because one, nobody wants to really talk to their parents about sex, but the parents are the only ones really in the life that at the time, like, have that role.
Yeah.
But yet we don't want our teachers to talk to us about sex. So the only place now that kind of comes out is that we talk to our friends about sex who are uneducated as much as we are. And so it just becomes this kind of echo chamber of like assumptions and kind of, you know, make believe.
Well, for me, growing up, you know, growing up and having girlfriends, like, I didn't really talk to my girlfriends about sex. I remember because I've always known that I've been a really sexual person. Like, I remember the first time that I just wanted to kiss someone so bad. I was in my room. His name was Zach. He lived across the street from me. He was super,
Shout out to Zach.
Shout out to Zach. That's right. I don't know where you are in the world now, but I had we were 5 years old. We were 5 years old. There was a moment. But
Instant chemistry.
Instant chemistry. I remember I was standing in my room, And Zach was like sitting in front of me playing with toys or something like that. And I had this urge to like kiss him. I was like, I just want to kiss Zach so badly. But I was like frozen there. I remember this like vividly, just standing there being like, oh, I want to kiss you. And then, something happened and the moment passed and I was like, dang it. I was like, I missed it. What was I supposed to do in that moment? But then as I was getting older and I started masturbating when I was 10. And my mom caught me at one point and was like, you need to keep that to yourself. Like, you need to, because I was just kind of like doing it wherever. And she goes, you should, that's a private thing to do that in private. That was like the conversation we had. That was it.
Yeah,
that was a 30-second conversation we had about it. It was very embarrassing for me. But then I was just like, oh, like I need to keep this private. I need to keep this hidden. This isn't
right.
thing.
And I think a lot of people, I would be surprised if there isn't a large majority of people who have that kind of feeling and learning process with like the first experiences with sex and sexuality and masturbation, like feeling like, oh, this is something I have to keep hidden in the dark and in a secret, like I have to go alone into this kind of world by myself and think that, it's like shame and guilt, but yet at the same time it's this overwhelming urge that I can't stop doing, and yet, it's like we grow up with this like just really mixed bag of feelings around sex and sexuality, and how do we talk about that, and how do we express that in a world that wants us to keep it quiet, keep it secret, and and that's it's a challenge. And I would be curious, since this is the women's perspective episode, like what was like one of the major challenges for you, apart from that first kind of sexual experience of feeling like you have to kind of keep it to yourself? Like what was that like, kind of growing up into that age and era of kind of you expressing and kind of exploring that for the first time, but not really having anybody to reflect and bounce what you're feeling and doing off of? Like,
yeah. And I'm going to answer your question in a twofold, because the first thing you said was like, what can we do? And then the second thing you said was like, from my experience, what was it like? And I think that one thing that could be done is just how you react to people being like, and when I say people, I mean kids. Like when kids are being sexual, when kids are exhibiting sexual behaviors, to like have it be okay, like, and you don't have to like, you don't have to be like, yay, good for you. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Like, don't start clapping like when little kids like pee in the toilet for the first time. Like, that's inappropriate. That would be weird. But just having it be okay, just being like, okay, that is what you're doing. Like, and having an open conversation about, what your feelings are around it. Like, I remember as like fast forward to when I was in high school, I had a high school sweetheart and we started having sex and our parents found out about it. And, I got different reactions from my parents. My dad never talked to me about it, but he did start paying for my birth control. So that was exciting, but we never had a conversation. It was just like, now dad is paying for birth control. And my mom got super upset with me, was just like, but from her perspective, like looking back on it and being an adult looking back on it, I see that, from her perspective, she was just upset that I wouldn't share that with her. She was hurt. She was hurt that I wouldn't share that with her. But as, I think I was 16 at the time, as a 16-year-old, her being really upset with me about having sex, I was just like, F this, I was just like, I felt like I was being punished. And also, and we still do not agree about this, like to this day, she's like convinced that she heard me having sex this like one particular night. And I was like, Mom, I promise you I was not having sex that night. And she like won't believe me. Like to this day, she like, we still get upset with each other about it. Like my dad has to like calm us down. Be like, okay, this literally, I'm like, Mom, this happened when I was 16. Why would I still lie about this? Why would I still, this was like over half of my life ago. Like what? And anyway, so I'm just like, and there's part of me that's like, I should just let it go and let her believe like forever, like until my mom dies, she's going to think that she heard me having sex that night. And which is fine. But, you know, from her, like from my perspective, having her react in that way, I felt really bad. I felt really bad about having sex. I felt like, it kind of reinforced this idea of don't talk about it. Like, don't talk about it or like bad things will happen. But if you do talk about it, then bad things will just happen in lesser ways.
Yeah.
Because she did want me to talk about it, but she was still upset with me. It was kind of, I don't know. I was confused. I was hurt. I was angry. But
so do you think that might have played into like later years, like your...
Yeah, exactly. So, and then, sorry, I'm kind of making this a longer story.
Yeah, no worries.
But his mom's reaction was that she wanted me to listen to this tape. It was like this Christian Jesus like abstinence tape, I think. I don't know. I refused to listen to it. I was like, I told her straight up. I was just like, I'm not going to do that. And she was like, well, I'll be okay with you having sex if you listen to this tape. And I was like, no, not going to.
That's an interesting arrangement for her. Like her negotiation for herself was like, I'll be okay as long as you listen to this tape. Like,
and she was a nurse, but she was also, she also is just like really religious and very much like wait and, you know, till marriage to have sex and all that stuff. And that also showed up in like my first sexual encounter with him, with my high school sweetheart as well, which he felt like super guilty, super ashamed, like super like, this is so wrong, all this stuff. Like the first time that we had sex, he got up and walked out. Like, he was like, I was just like, okay. And then that brought up a lot of like guilt and shame for me. Cause I'm like, wow, now I'm an asshole for asking for sex. Like the first time that I had sex, I was like, I'm an asshole for asking for sex because now I've put this on my partner that, you know, he feels like upset and guilty. And then I'm upset because I'm like, this is stupid. Because why does religion have to dictate like whether or not we have sex? Like in my mind, I'm like, that's dumb. You know, as a 16-year-old. And so on the one hand, I'm like, I feel really guilty and ashamed for having sex. And on the other hand, I'm like, I shouldn't feel this way. Like I shouldn't have to feel this way. But there doesn't seem to be, at that point, with all of these things happening, there wasn't a healthy outlet for me to express that. Like other than my friends who, like I said, I didn't really talk to my friends about sex other than the fact that we would share if we had sex or not. But it's not like we were really talking about it. I think the most extensive conversation I had about sex with a couple of girlfriends of mine was how to give a good blowjob. Which was great. It was an awesome conversation. I've gotten a lot of compliments about my blowjobs. So I'm like, yay, I'm glad that happened. But other than that, like, other than like, you're either having sex or you're not having sex, but we weren't having conversations like, what does it feel like? Or like, is everything okay? Or how are you doing in your relationship? Like, we didn't have that level or capacity or communication to have those conversations. And I don't know if that was just me. I don't think that it was just me who was like not, or else it wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't think so either, because when I think about like growing up as a guy and talking to your friends about sex, like it was never like an in-depth conversation about sex. It was more so like, are you having it?
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it, you know, like there was no like sharing techniques. There was no like, you know, sharing lessons or experiences or whatever. It was more so like, did you get laid? And that was like pretty much it.
Yes or no.
Yeah, yes or no. And then you'd get razzed if it was a no, and you'd, you know, get told you were bullshitting if you said yes, you know, like it was just a weird male culture. But no, so I'm interested to know if those experiences of feeling kind of the guilt and shame around sex, did that lead to any like issues or problems with orgasms for you?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think so, because I didn't actually have an orgasm until I was 18. Like my first year at college was the first time that I ever had an orgasm. And yeah, I think that it had to do with, I just didn't know how to ask. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't
So you hadn't had an orgasm by yourself either?
No, like ish, like kind of. I don't know how to explain kind of having an orgasm.
Well, I think that women have so many different types of orgasms, like in different levels.
Yeah.
You know, just in my experience with my partner now, she has so many different types of orgasms that make me so curious, because I feel like as a guy, we experience sex in such a different way. Like as far as orgasm and completion and things like it, I don't know, like there's levels in the intensity of orgasms, but like the way that she describes it is like there can be these like myriad of different types and levels and experiences.
Yeah, no,
So that,
absolutely.
I mean, the ish kind of, it does make sense to me just in my experience of talking to another woman about this as well, is that I think that there might be something to the, you know, the different levels of orgasm, just in the sense that, stimulating the clit versus stimulating the G-spot can create massively different orgasms.
Experiences.
And so, right. Yeah. And so I was just curious, because it seems to be there's a difference in male and female sexuality when it comes to like the emotional context and the like state of mind that's necessary in some. I'm not putting this blanket over everyone, but I'm curious if you would agree or disagree with a state of mind when it comes to achieving orgasm.
Yes.
Because it seems for males, there really isn't a state of mind required to achieve an orgasm in most cases. You know, I think that there's probably some when you get into like erectile dysfunction and over porn consumption and things like that, where you probably have, you know, something emotional, some sort of mental or emotional component that may be holding you back from being able to achieve orgasm. But with women, it seems like there is more of an emotional component to that.
Yeah, emotional and mental. Yeah,
mental
exactly.
component.
And like being in your head about it. Exactly. Where what's there for me is, or what was there, especially in the beginning and still shows up as well, is this like, I have to, because so much is put on orgasming. Like so much is put on like you have to orgasm, or like that's the goal.
Right.
And so for me, always makes me think of Ross. For me, I always wanted to orgasm, and my partner was always asking me if I did, or if I was, or, you know, what I needed, and like all this stuff. Or not he wasn't asking me what I needed necessarily. Like, again, we didn't have like the language. It was just so like clunky and weird.
Yeah.
And we're just like having sex and just like hoping that it turns out. And that it was more of like a mental game of, what do I need to do, or do I need to concentrate more? Like I am like in my head, like what do I need to be doing? Like instead of just enjoying the moment, like enjoying just like being with my partner, enjoying how it feels, like as seeing what feels good, like having it be more of an exploration, a discovery, a connection, a communication between two people. You know, it was more of just, I hope that I get this right. Like that's what it was for me, is I hope that I get this right. I hope that I come. I hope that, you know, it feels good. I hope that this happens, you know, but I'm not saying any of that out loud.
Yeah. So it's like this kind of pressure. It's like this pressure.
It's pressure.
Yeah. And I think that we're kind of touching on one of the issues that I think is probably holding so many people back, is the pressure that has been built up around sex in their own lives and in the way that they're thinking that their partner may be experiencing it as well. And so there's so many assumptions and the stories that people are telling themselves about sex, about how their partners are experiencing sex, and they're not communicating about it. So it's building up this gigantic kind of, shadow form in their mind about this illusion of like what is necessary and this anticipation that, the orgasm is the most important thing, right? So if orgasm is not achieved, then sex was not successful in some way, shape, or form. And now there's like guilt and shame around it, right? So
yeah. And I've had that with my male partners in my past, where I've had a partner where one of the breakdowns in us like having sex was that he put so much onto having me orgasm that it was detrimental. It was like I felt a lot of pressure to like come, and then I ultimately was like resentful of that because I'm like, I shouldn't have to like feel pressure to like have me orgasm to make you feel good about yourself. Because now it's about you feeling good about yourself and not about giving me pleasure. And so that was one of the things that ultimately was the demise of that relationship, honestly. And one of the things was that he was so focused on performing, kind of what we talked about in the last one about where the guys are coming from, where he was so focused on performing and so focused on like, I have to make you orgasm. And I would tell him, I'm like, I still enjoy sex even if I don't orgasm. Like I don't always have to come. Like me having to, and that might be a part of like my conditioning of, like the whole like, 80% of the time women don't come. And so part of my conditioning is that like, oh, well, I don't have to, like, I don't have to come. I can still enjoy sex. Like it's fine. Like kind of like that. It's fine. Like conversation.
Right. And I think that's probably part of, that there's some deep roots in that like ideology, because of the fact that for most men, I would say, that thought is not there. Right. The thought of like, oh, me not having an orgasm is totally okay. Like I don't want to like, speak in platitudes and say always and, everyone, but the majority of men I don't think have that thought process. And that's where I'm curious what you think is the solution to that overpressured for you to have an orgasm. And it seemed like it was becoming more about, his enjoyment of your pleasure rather than it was about
my pleasure.
Right. And about the experience of both of you being enjoying each other's pleasure. Yeah. So what do you think that like a solution or like some sort of balance would be in that?
Well, in this particular case, there wasn't a solution because he just like held on to it, like regardless of how I came at it, regardless of if I was like, this is for us to like be together or like, so whatever it was that was like trying to be created, it still always came back to his issue with, no, it has to look a certain way. It has to do this. It has to da 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 da. And I don't want to get like too far into that, but as far as a just solution in general, I mean, it really does go back, especially so bringing it all the way back to the women's perspective, being able to have those conversations with your partner, whatever that looks like. And it could start sounding like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you and I have no idea how to have this conversation with you. I'm completely terrified and a little bit clueless, or whatever it is. Maybe not clueless, but like I don't know how to have this conversation with you because I've never had this conversation before.
Right.
And just setting aside all of the things that have happened that have women be silent, which is how we were raised, like having, like when I was sharing those examples from earlier, because I wasn't raised in a place where you do talk about sexuality openly like that. And not that it was, and I don't think that I was purposefully suppressed either. Like, I don't think that my parents were like, never talk about your sexuality. Like, I don't think that, but
Right.
it just wasn't a topic. It just wasn't a thing that you talked about.
Well, yeah. And I think
And-
that if we look at that, we can say we're all growing up in different environments in our household,
Yeah.
but we're all sharing a collective reality of society's conditioning.
Yeah.
And society seems to me, and this might just be my opinion of this, but it feels like society as a whole is actually like willingly oppressing sexuality in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so we all have to deal with and confront that reality that being open and honest about our sexuality isn't okay on any side of the spectrum of sexuality, no matter where you fall on it. Being open and free and happy about it is not something that society really wants to respect and give space for, and also provide you the education that you want
Yeah.
at the times that you need it. And so that, I think, is something that we all, when we get into a partnership, having respect for the other one's upbringing and really acknowledging that as I need to get to know this, because this is going to play a massive role in understanding how you approach sexuality for yourself, for me. What are your thoughts around this? What did you grow up thinking? What did you, are you at a stage where you want to challenge those beliefs? Like, are you wanting to like break through and kind of express yourself openly? How is that? What are those conversations that we can have? And it starts with the first one of being like, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know how to have this conversation, because there really isn't too many modeling of how to have that conversation.
Yeah. And even if there was, there's not like a way to
Right,
have
exactly.
the conversation.
Yep.
I've had that conversation with different partners, and especially being in the relationship that I am now with Brandy, there's been so much that we have talked about that I didn't think was like, I have never had some of these conversations that I've been having, where it is really saying what I want. And it's discovering what I want and being okay that I don't always know what I want, and that I am discovering that. Because I think that's one of the barriers, is that there's the conditioning that you should know, since it's not talked about. And we talked about this on the last one, where it's like there's this idea that you should already know. Like, you should just already know.
Yeah.
And then we just fumble our way through it, both of us, trying to figure it out individually, instead of coming together and having a conversation about how we both don't know.
Exactly. And I think it's important to recognize too that it's not just one conversation. So we don't put the pressure on having like this
You must solve everything in this conversation.
In this conversation, it's actually a series of conversations that would
What's an ongoing
be,
conversation
exactly,
that never ends?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like every sexual situation that you get into is an opportunity to have another conversation that allows you to get more comfortable talking about your own sexuality, because you may be with that partner forever, or you may not, and you may get with another partner. But the more conversations that you have along the way about your own sexuality, then the more comfortable you are going to be talking about it with the partner that you're with forever, or with the new partner that you may get down the road. And so I think recognizing that it is an ongoing process that gets kind of easier over time as we kind of break down the conditioning, but we also get more confident in what it is that we like and what we want. I think that would be.
And then the other thing that is the next step is being able to be the partner to hear that. And so if you're in a male-female relationship and the woman comes up to you as the man and wants to have a conversation about how sex is going and what's working and what's not working, that you as the man are a safe space to hear that and to be open to it. Because one of the reasons why I didn't speak up in my past relationships is because I didn't see that as a safe space. Because what I was met with in not just one but multiple situations was a defensiveness, where there's just my partner trying to defend what they're already doing instead of hearing it as not a critique. It's not a critique of what your partner's doing, but it's an ask. It's an ask and a conversation about what you want. And so when your sexuality, and when I say you, I mean men, if you're, well, I guess it doesn't have to be just men, but when your sexuality is so tied to who you are that anyone who says boo like shakes you to your core and you have to immediately defend yourself, you're not a safe space for your partner to grow with you in that capacity. Like you're not. And being able to be approachable, being able to be the person that if your partner needs something, that you can listen to them as what they need instead of an attack on you or anything that you've done. They're with you. They love you. P.S.
Right.
They like
right. And the fact that they want to have this conversation with you speaks volumes to,
right.
you know, who they see you being in their life. Mm-hmm. And, you know, having respect for that, I think, it goes a long way to, you know, creating that healthy kind of environment to grow and get better. And I think that's, we talked about it a little bit last time, where it's this kind of conundrum in the minds of some men where it's like they want this thing, but don't recognize that their growth could bring that more and quicker. And like you could get better and better and better. And it could be this world of sexuality that grows and gets infinitely awesome. Mm-hmm. But they get stuck behind the kind of component that you were identifying there, which is any kind of critique or any kind of like learning or
even just an ask, like a request.
Right. Is like, it's an affront to what I was supposed to already know. Like I was just born with all of the knowledge, and you trying to tell me or ask me for something that I wasn't already going to give you is somehow making me less than. Right. And now it's attached to my manhood and my man card. And now I'm getting that removed. And now I'm going to be publicly shamed in front of all the men in the world. And, you know, it's like,
yeah, it escalates very quickly.
Exactly. It's like, why? Like, why do we have to go that route when really having those conversations creates an incredibly amazing environment for sex to be healthy, happy, adventurous, exciting. And
or whatever you want it to be.
Right.
Yeah, because at that point, if you're able to, I had a thought while you were talking, like the first episode is called Just Fucking Talk to Each Other. This could be Just Fucking Listen to Each Other.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's the title. Just fucking listen to each other and listen without the filter. Listen without the filter of, oh, my partner is telling me I'm doing something wrong, or listen without the filter of, oh, I should already know this. You know, listen, just like take off, give yourself a little compassion for being human. You're just a human being human. That's okay. That's totally fine. We all have that. We all get defensive. We all get, you know, however we get when people come to us about something that we think that we should already know about. We all have that.
Totally.
But if you're able to set that aside or like lift that filter for the conversation when your partner is really just, your partner really does want to have great sex with you.
Right. They really do.
They really,
and they probably want to have really
do.
Crazy kinky sex with you, but they don't really understand how to even communicate the like vanilla desires. So they can't, there's like no hope at you know, expressing the like more adventurous desires.
Exactly. If you can't tell someone like, hey, put your finger here or put your hand here or move your hips there or touch me like this, if you can't communicate that, how the heck are you supposed to be like, hey, please tie me up, leave me for an hour and then come back and fuck me like crazy? Like, right. You know?
Yeah. Exactly. Or, hey, let's go, you know, experiment in all these different ways.
Right.
You know, yeah, exactly. So it's like you have to get used to what you want and where your boundaries are and articulating those. And I think that the better you, that's interesting because I really do think that the better you are at listening, the better you're going to be at explaining and sharing what you want. Because in the act of listening and actively listening, like without the filters, what's actually happening in that same process is that your partner is modeling a form of communication that now you can reciprocate. And now you can match that level of vulnerability, that level of authenticity, and it will, I think, be exponentially it will exponentially grow the more you can sit there and make that space available to them to explain what it is that they want.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that would just create a cycle that would be really, really helpful for a lot of people. So just fucking listen to each other.
Just fucking listen to each other. Well, and then the other thing too is that if you're listening to your partner just in a conversation, like not even having sex with them, but having that conversation outside of sex about it, if you can listen to them then, and if you can listen to them and be that safe space for that, and this is like, you know, this spans, we're talking about humans now. We're not talking just about men and women. If you can be a safe space for someone and you can be approachable and you can have just a conversation about it, it will be way easier for your partner to orgasm because now you are this safe space that they can be however they need to be and they can ask for what they want. And you have now provided them the space to orgasm. It's like you're providing that space for them to be comfortable, to be safe, to be loved, to be connected to, and to be there to listen to their body. Because if you can listen to their verbal cues, then you can take that knowledge and then start to also listen to their body cues as well. You can listen to, you know, when they moan a certain way, you can feel for like, oh, when I touch them here, this is the response that I get, or, you know, things like that. And then when you can have a verbal conversation outside of sex and you start to listen inside of sex to those nonverbal cues, then you can actually start to hear verbal cues in sex as well. And your partner can give you verbal cues as you're having sex, because that was something that I didn't do either. If my partners aren't a safe space for me to even have a conversation about what I want outside of the bedroom, like that's where the hope came in, like in the bedroom. I'm like, I hope this goes well, because like I'm not going to say shit because I don't want to turn this into an argument while we're having sex. That sounds even worse, you know? And so, but if you can have that verbal conversation outside of the bedroom, then it'll start to happen inside of the bedroom. And I know that for like, maybe for some people that like sounds terrifying because they're like, I don't want anybody to fucking say shit to me. Like, I want to have a conversation. But what it sounds like is while your partner is moaning, they tell you where to put your hand, your finger, your whatever. And all of a sudden it's like the sexiest communication that you will ever receive. It's like, do this. And I'm like, yes, I will. I will do that right now. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah. And it goes back to your comment in the last podcast where you said the manual is right there. Literally, the manual is in front of you. You don't have to, there's nothing that you have to figure out. There's nothing you have to know. There literally is just providing a safe, approachable space to listen to what your partner needs, right, and being able to hear it in a way that they are gotten, and then being able to give it to them.
Exactly. Yeah. The manual is right there. It's all you have to do is listen to it.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. Yeah. And also give space for whatever stories that they have from their past. Because I still deal with that. Like, even being someone who is really open about my sexuality and is really open about sex and sexuality and all of that stuff, there's still times where I find it difficult to say what I want. Like that shame or embarrassment or guilt like still creeps up, you know?
Right. I mean, I think whether most of us, I won't say all, but most of us suffer from some type of fear of rejection too, where we're afraid of kind of articulating what it is that we desire or want because we're afraid of what the response is going to be. Not that we might not get it, but that we might, you know, they might think that it's too wild or that it's something they're not going to want. And now it's almost like we are feeling that shame and fear before we even ask it, And so I think working through that and, that's I'm talking about, I'm like, that's a difficult one to solve without just going through the motions of like doing it. And
that's one where it does. It just calls for courage.
Yep.
Like courage is having the fear be there and acting anyway. That's courage. It's like the fear is not going away. The fear, the shame, the guilt, whatever that emotion is that comes up.
Right.
It's not going away. And then you just have to act anyway. Because for me, it's not necessarily that I'm going to be rejected. That's not what comes up for me anyway. For me, it is the fear of, is it okay to ask? Like, is this okay? That's what comes up for me. It's like, is this okay? Is it okay to ask this question? Like, am I going to upset my partner by asking this question? Because like I said, what I've dealt with is that it's not okay to ask, that it causes an upset to even ask because it challenges, what they already know or challenges their ego in some way. And so for me, what the fear is this okay to ask? Am I going to cause an upset by asking for what I want? And so that's the reason why it's so important to provide a safe space.
Yeah, and have those conversations kind of frequently, often in the bedroom, out of the bedroom, and, get to know your partner.
Yeah. And also being able to, like, what is it? Positive reinforcement is great. Like positive reinforcement is awesome.
Absolutely.
Where it like on anyone's party where it's like, I really love it when you do this. You should do this more.
Yeah.
Or, or even if it's in the moment, or especially if it's in the moment, if your partner is doing something where you're like, oh my God, if they keep doing that, I'm definitely going to come, say something, be like, keep going, or say yes, or be like, whatever verbal cue that you need to give. That's like, yes, right there. That's it.
Yeah.
Like it's not even like the correction or, hey, I want this, or please do this, or da da da. It's like, if they do something that it's like, yup. Say that.
Yeah. No, and I think that there's something to articulating the message as well in like a we. Like, can we try something? Like, I'd love it if we tried something, right? Put it in, phrasing it in a language where it's like, if you want something, just try phrasing it in a we rather than can you do, because maybe just phrasing it in the sense of like exploration, experimentation, rather than using the language of like, can you do this? Because maybe that languaging of using you kind of raises the defenses of like, am I doing something wrong? It does
put the impetus on the other person.
Whereas if we're doing this, then we're just experimenting and we want to try this. And this is about us and the experience, and that, I don't know if that's going to help people out there, but it might just
I think that's brilliant.
But like give, take the pressure off of like making it feel like I'm critiquing you or I'm criticizing what you're doing. It's more so I'm asking, can we try this? Because, it is, it is
an us activity.
It is an us activity for sure.
Totally. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, that was, really like my main points were just recognizing in yourself what your barriers are, where your barriers come from, and that, if they're coming from and they're valid, like there's nothing, it's not like everyone has barriers, right? They're valid and they don't have to have a place or a hold on you now.
Absolutely.
Like point blank, they don't have to have a hold on you now. They're, I'm not 16 anymore. No one's yelling at me for having sex. right? Like I'm not in my past relationships where it didn't work. You know, I am who I am now. That has happened in my past, and I can recognize that those things still come up for me, but I don't have to have them hold me back anymore at all. And so first step is just recognizing your barriers, knowing that they don't have to have anything to do with how you get to be now, and then creating that with your partner. Like sharing that, like share that with your partner. Be like, hey, these are things that have been barriers for me. Or like when we have sex, like this is what comes up for me. Or I never feel like I can ask for this. And then if your partner comes to you, listen to them. Listen to what they have to say, and know that it has nothing to do with you. Like if someone says something to you like, hey, when you touch me here, it really brings up this memory for me. Because that's happened to me before. It doesn't have anything to do with my partner, or there was nothing wrong with like the way that they touched me. It was just that that's what came up for me. Mm-hmm. And they need to know that so that they do something differently in the future, so that doesn't get triggered. No, right? And so it's like, brilliant. Yeah. So just being able to listen to your partner from a place of understanding, compassion, safety, connection, love, you know, vulnerability, like really acknowledge if your partner is that open and vulnerable with you, thank them.
Yeah. And more than likely, orgasms are going to be very plentiful. The more open and honest that you are, everybody's going to be having orgasms.
So many orgasms. Really, because when you're a safe space and your partner can just be however they need to be around you, and they don't have to think about like, I hope it goes well, or they don't have to think about, I hope they don't touch me in this way, or I would really like to ask for this, but maybe I shouldn't say it out loud. And they're having all, if all of those conversations are out in the open and gone and dealt with, and then all there is just two people who want to connect and have sex and have fun and like whatever that is for you. Oh my gosh, orgasms abound. Orgasms abound. Yes, exactly. So just fucking listen to each other. And thanks for having this conversation with me, Shaun.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me back.
Always.
For sure.
Yeah. Anything else that you can think of before we sign off here?
I think you covered it very well in kind of articulating how to create the environment for, you know, from your perspective of how to create multiple orgasms in your relationship. And I think that's why people are tuning in.
Orgasmic. Oh, that's all. Orgasmic relationships. Oh my God, I'm the biggest dork ever.
No, but I think that, yeah. And one of the ways, if you're listening to this podcast, might be to listen to this podcast with your partner. Because one of the things that I have found in my own relationship is that if there is a conversation that you're not sure how to bring up, then if there is content out there of people talking about that, and you're able to kind of have that space already created by something else, then the conversation might be easier to start because now you have a place to start from rather than just kind of, you know, like randomly throughout your day, how do I just throw this in there and start this space? But you could say, hey, I found this really great podcast. I'd love to listen to it together. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's honestly one of the biggest compliments to me has been people telling me that is what this podcast has been for them, has been a way to start conversations that they've been meaning to, like multiple, like not just about like it, and it hasn't just been with romantic partners. I had a family member who was able to talk with their parents about their sexuality. And that they were like, oh, that this conversation, you know, we were listening to your podcast and it opened up a space where that conversation was possible and I didn't know how to bring it up.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And I've had multiple people share with me. They're like, oh, I was able to have this conversation, or I was able to have this conversation. And I was just like, oh my God, like it fulfills my whole heart and dream and purpose on the planet to hear people say that. So also, if that's you, if this podcast has opened something up for you, or has allowed for you to have a conversation that maybe that you weren't going to have before, or didn't know how to have, or didn't know how to open it or anything like that, please share with me. Share with me. Write a review. If you have any questions, please write a review. If you have any requests for episodes, please, subscribe, write a review. If you really, really just are like feeling bold and audacious and just like, I love Elizabeth Cunningham, she should do this forever and ever and ever, because it is what I want to do forever and ever and ever, P.S. And you want to subscribe and donate monthly, oh my God, please do that.
Yeah, so you can download the Anchor app from the App Store and then get all of that information. Look up Love Dripping from the Walls inside the Anchor app, and then you can subscribe right there. And you can donate, you can become a member, and you can actually call the podcast and leave a message for Elizabeth so that she can hear your voice and hear your compliments and hear your reviews, and hopefully one day share those on a podcast.
Yeah, that would be amazing to have a whole episode that's just people's comments and kind of having a conversation off of what questions are asked or comments that are posted and things like that. I would love to do that. And it would also be great feedback, because the other reason that I'm doing this podcast is because I want to talk about things that are relevant to people and that people are actually dealing with. And so tell me what you're dealing with. Tell me what's relevant to you, what you're dealing with. And I would love to, have a conversation. And if it's not a conversation that I think that I can have, I would absolutely get somebody on here to have that conversation. I know people.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks all the love. Keep loving, keep listening, and we'll talk with you soon. Thank you for listening to Love Dripping from the Walls. You can follow on Instagram or Facebook at Love Dripping from the Walls. Leave comments and questions, and I may share your thoughts on the podcast. Please rate and review on whatever platform you are listening on. If you want to support Love Dripping from the Walls, log on to the Anchor app and subscribe or give monthly donations. Keep listening and keep loving.